Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, where you guys are. I hope you're having a fantastic day. SoulSaint here, and I got some news about what's coming up around the future when it comes to some of our recent events. You guys do know, and I'm just going to be honest with you guys, that we do have the Lordly Summoning Pool event, which we're going to break down here and talk about why it's good, why it's bad, and if you should go for it. In addition to that, we also got some of the other information that we're going to talk about in terms of upcoming events for summoning, progressive events for some shards. You know, we're in the middle of the love season with Valentine's Day being around the corner, and with that being said, they are always well known for dropping their couple events, and we're going to talk about that today. I'll go ahead and start with the couple sides of things, and we're going to break down if it's good or bad and kind of go from there. I'm not going to lie, progressive events are on the horizon. So on Tuesday, we're going to have a couple of events for some champions that are from a progressive standpoint. So it's basically going to be all shards. I'm just going to say it like that. We have Ancients, Voids, Primals, and Sacreds. For the Ancients, Primals, and Sacreds, we're going to have legendary champions such as Sissia, who is a Demon Spawn champion, really, really good HP burner and burn activator. Great for some areas like Spider and some other miscellaneous content, believe it or not, like Hydra, for example. She's actually really good as a damage dealer. And she so happens to partner up with a cutie called Cardiel. So Cardiel is also on this list, but he's going to be for the Void side of the legendary shard pools. If you do have a progressive event standpoint, this guy is top tier. He does a little bit of everything and then some. He's a good damage dealer. He's a good healer. He's a great cleanser. He's a good revive on death champion. He is a great ally attacker. And then on top of that, he also has increased speed by all battles by 19%. So he's a great orally champion. And then he also partners up with his Sissia and always attacks them when it's, you know, they're on the same team and she does her move. So he's always going in with her. Never leaving the loved one behind. So those are two champions that are going to be included together. We also have the Queen of Hearts, question mark? Is that what she kind of alluded to? If you kind of see how her design is all developed, there's like a little bit of hearts. Maybe not the queen, but she's the queen of my heart. Let's say that. I love my Venus. And she's a poisoner, decreased defense, weaken, HP burn champion. She's a little bit of everything. She's kind of like Lydia in a sense, maybe without the A3 being a little bit different, but the A2 with the decreased defense, a weaken, and a burn, she kind of does a little bit more now that I think about it. And then she has the effect of being able to remove buffs from all enemies whenever Cupid is, which is her couple. Speaking of love is in the air, he's also going to be on this banner coming into Tuesday. So great champion for Hydra, great champion for HP burns in general. Really good damage dealer, especially when put together. But the big kicker is when they're together and they're on the team and he gets hit and Venus is on the team, he's always counter-attacking. So stacks always inflict more damage. And then that Venus part right there where you get punished for doing something to him, which is, it can be kind of impactful because he's hitting everybody. He's hitting everybody, and you have to work around that. Or you have to work with it in mind, which can be really good for a lot of like AoE-based content, right? So, very strong champion when partnered together with Venus. I think Venus stands good alone, but even with him, it's better. With that being said, we also got the newest lovebirds on the block. We have Kaja and Timid the Fool. Kaja's actually really good as a speed lead champion, booster, reviver, a little bit of a healer, although that one's not as impactful as maybe some other champions in the game. Think about your Python, for example. But really, really good. Turn meter reductions are also reduced. This champion, I feel like this couple in general is kind of slept on, and a lot of people give me criticism for it. Maybe I'm coping, I'm not entirely sure, but for the most part, I think that they're pretty solid. Maybe not S-tier champions, but pretty solid B or A-tier type champions, if we're being honest. I think they're good. Maybe even great depending on the right scenarios, right? So Timid being the complementary to her, Provoker with the passive, increased accuracy, attacks all enemies, and also has a True Fear associated to it. The A2, which was the big selling point for him, which is the remove all, or it's like a buff removal without being a buff strip removal. It's just a duration drop, but most buffs outside of mastery procs that give him an extra duration on it are typically roughly around the range of like 2 turn durations or 3 turn durations at most. So him decreasing it by 3 turns basically just removes the buff altogether. So very, very strong champion. Grants an extra turn if there's no enemies with active buffs. That means he gets an extra turn, and it always grants it no matter what if Kaja's on the team. And then of course his A1 heals himself, which is actually a lot more exponential than I thought. He's actually kind of a hard to kill champion when he's constantly doing that. Maybe with some counterattack or something along those lines. He's always healing himself, which can be very, very obnoxious. Very, very cool champions. I think I love the designs. I think they're amongst some of the more unique ones established. And then, of course, from our next following day, which is actually going to be on the 14th itself, we are going to have some other champions that are going to be a part of the next pool. So this is the new group that's going to be a part of the legendary teams here. We're going to have some interesting ones, and this is one that I think is probably the most exciting one, I want to say. We have Kirito. Kirito is going to be a damage dealer who partners with the 9-Fox cutie herself. Good Yumiko. I have one myself. I love my Yumiko. She's a game changer of a champion. I actually want more than one if possible, so we can do some very unique content with her. They are going to be on this next list. So your Voids is going to be Yumiko. Kirito is going to be on your Primals, Ancients, and Sacreds. Both very good champions. He's pretty much your staple damage dealer, for the lack of better words. He is Spirit Affinity, so keep that in mind. Block active skills whenever Yumiko is on the team cannot be resistant. That's where it's really kind of key at. Whenever she's not on the team, it's pretty much 80% with a 100% chance to land it. Then you have the factor of resistance versus accuracy whenever Yumiko's not on the team. So, has on his A2, he has the attack and has a stun for 2 turns. That's actually kind of unique. It grants an extra turn and resets this cooldown on the skill if Yumiko is on the same team and this kills an enemy instead. And then, of course, he has that A1, which hits 3 times with the weaken on board with it. When Yumiko dies, it also grants him a turn. So there's a lot of you get punished for touching his couple associated champions. So very, very cool. And I think she has something very similar in a sense where she has a chance to steal and veil buffs whenever a character is on the team. And then for the most part, whenever someone fills a turn meter of an enemy under Hex, it fills this champion's turn meter instead, so Yumiko gets to steal it, and that's only going to happen whenever a character's on the team. So those are the 2 factors that kind of make her unique. She kind of stands alone amongst herself. Kirito's kind of solid as a damage dealer, maybe not the top tier side of things, maybe a solid B, maybe A, but with Yumiko, he kind of goes into a solid A. I think Yumiko's already S tier by herself with what she does with her cooldown resets and the lockout. So very, very strong champion to work off of. We do flip it to some lesser knowns, or I guess maybe some off the radar for a lot of people. Countess Lix and her associated champion, which is going to be Acelin. She actually has a unique kit where she reduces the cooldown of all skills except herself by 1 turn for her allies. It is pretty hefty on the cooldown side. Even when booked, it's still a 5-turn cooldown, which makes her a little bit harder to enjoy. 4-turn cooldown for a decreased speed. It does have some turn meter effects as well, which is kind of cool. And then basically removing random debuff at the start of her turn, which is kind of nice. And the weekend, it's kind of cool. I think I've seen her and Acelin do some cool, interesting things inside Arena as a primary focus. But overall, both of those champions pale in comparison to a lot of the current meta champions or champions that are a little bit more prominent in those areas. So Acelin, probably the coolest looking champion in the game by my opinion. I love wings. I love the whole sword. I like the aesthetic of his like skin / breastplate. How it looks. It looks really, really dope. Red being one of my favorite colors. Stun, weaken, ignore defense, strength, and ally protection buffs with an A2 that does a pretty decent amount of damage. A1 for decreased defense. With Countess Lix, she joins in on the attack. And then on top of that too, I believe that pretty much covers where the influence is. I definitely think that these two could use a little bit of a facelift in terms of their kits, making them a little bit more competitive, maybe a little bit more enticing so that they have a little bit of a stronger impact as a couple. I feel like couples, when you work your way to get 2 of those champions that are legendaries and that they're partnered together, there should be some like, okay, I feel this. They have a place to thrive. Like Venus Cupidus is great in Hydra. Kirito and Yumiko, great in Arena, for example, right? And then, of course, Kaja and Timid, although they require playtesting, has a great like affinity attraction in terms of just PvE content from a wave clear standpoint, as well as a little bit of a nuance when it comes to PvP. They're really interesting champions, right? Now, that's not all. We have some more. We have a little bit more on the Dark Elf side. We have Xavier, who partners up with Bellinor. She's basically your go-to poisoner with a debuff spread that's only available when Bellinor's on the team. Bellinor being the high elf side of things, I believe. He is your Void associated, so he's only the Void, whereas Xavier is the other shards. And of course, most of his stuff has a tactical partner ability, which can only be activates his champion overkill skill, which is the A3. Also activates her poison rain, which is Xavier's on Xavier's kit, and it's only available when Xavier's on the same team. So it's basically like an extra overkill with an extra poison rain when these two are together. He has that decreased defense, decreased weaken, which is kind of nice across the board. They cannot be resistant when Xavier's on the same team, which makes his prominence a lot stronger whenever you're incorporating both of them into a team. I think of where is Xavier good at? So poisons are really great against like Dragon, for example. Maybe running a wave clear team like a part of like Seer's comp. I did a video on that many moons ago. Having that irresistible decreased defense and weakening makes him a great staple into that team comp to allow Seer to pop through the waves, and then of course Xavier can take over, and then they can kind of prioritize their kit towards the boss fight after that, right? Really cool, interesting dynamic you can maybe introduce. Great, he's great as a damage dealer on Clan boss, I would say so is Xavier, and Xavier is great as a poison exploder for some speed comps in terms of wave clearing as well. So some great complementary aspects that they can both thrive towards, and you can kind of see that dynamic, right? Now, with that being said, I believe that covers every champion that we have for February the 14th, but that's not all. We got one more day that we're going to talk about, and that's going to be Thursday the 15th, which we're going to have probably the most desired, or amongst the most desired, and these are amongst the most best champions in the game when it comes to PvP content, and maybe some other areas too as well. I'm not going to discredit it, but we're going to swing over to the undead side. So the undead is going to have Rhodos for your primals, ancients, and sacreds. He is by far one of the more annoyings. I hate Rhodos in live arena, and I'm so happy that I got someone like my Georgia to kind of counter into him. His A1 can technically one-shot a Rhodos if developed properly, and of course, the more procs that the A1 gets from Georgian, you need multi-hitters to basically be able to kill Rhodos because of his passive, which means that any single hit cannot exceed 50% of the champion's max HP. Or else it grants him an extra turn if that reduction does occur. So it's a cap no matter what. But if you're hitting him multiple times, which means that even if you do 50 in one hit and you're hitting him a second time and it does another 50, you get the kill, right? So that's the trick to him. But he actually is one of those type of champions that's tanky by nature because of that passive, and he does a lot of damage. And then he has a self-heal with his A2, which also destroys the enemy HP. And then once that gets to a certain point where he hits a cap, he's able to block revive with his A3. So it's a nice little synergy. That extra turn is probably the thing that is the most annoying thing in his kit, because even with lockout, he doesn't mind it. His cooldowns are such a short cooldown, and that extra turn helps him cycle back into it even faster. So very, very big annoyance, and that's why I don't like Rhodos, but I would love to have him, and that's why he may be an interesting champion to go for in this next progressive event. Now, what is he partnered to? Probably by far the most aggressive / best, most contended champion in live arena or in general when it comes to arena, and great everywhere else, is Sify, his bride. Great champion that does like a lot of fear removal or like debuff removals, removes all debuffs, excuse me, from Rhodos at the start of their turn if they are on the same team. The revive, great reviver, great buffer, by far probably the best A2 and the best A1 in the game when it comes to turn meter increase, block debuffs, increased defense, and increased speed, all in one ability. She is by far one of the best champions. Super fast base speed, by far the best. But that's not all. Her A1 with the sleep makes her irresistible, so that she always putting somebody to sleep, which is why she's so obnoxious. And of course, if you actually use her as a resist champion, she has a pretty hefty 80 extra to that stat in all battles. She's basically well-rounded and amongst the best across the board in every content. Those two are probably going to be the most desirable. Maybe a side note towards Yumiko as a good grab. Those are some pretty high-end, top-end competitive champions that you would want to use in today's arena format. Cardio could be great for a lot of miscellaneous content, both PvP and PvE. And then, of course, Cupidus Venus could be great for like Hydro content. So I can see a lot of contention in those areas, right? Now, we have one other set of champions that we're going to be pulling from, and I got to make sure I'm not looking in the wrong area, but I believe once I see him, I'll be able to tell you. It's Ulton of the Shell. He is the next one that's going to be coming out on the 15th as a part of the progressive event, where he partners with Owella. This champion has a little bit of a difficult place in this current terrain. Even in Faction Wars, even in miscellaneous content, he's not really looked at as an immediate go-to. And that's not to say he's bad, but just that there might be others that are better. And I think that's probably the biggest issue in the game right now for him. He doesn't really thrive anywhere in particular. Now, there is a little bit of a note towards the sleep, where it has a 100% chance of placing it. We'll ignore some resistance if Oella's on the team. Sleep being a great mechanic to use against Sand Devil. Could be one area you could use him at, but there's epics who could do it, and maybe even with a little bit more utility that can kind of negate his need from that. So it's a little bit harder to find a place for him, but your typical damage dealer in the summary words, that's pretty much all we got for him. However, on the flip side, Oella, not the top end for supports, but not a bad one nevertheless. She has some healing, decreased speed, that can't be resisted if Ulton's on the team. And then, of course, duration increase, which was kind of the nice little bit, unique. You've seen them in a lot of Infinity comps before the nerfs kind of came out in droves, where she was very valuable in those as an alternative. Turn meter boosting with an increased resistance also makes her a little bit harder to deal with in content where accuracy plays a big part. And then, of course, she has an activation whenever a champion loses their HP, she puts a continuous heal on them. But with Ulton in play, it also activates them instantly, and it can only happen once to an ally per turn. to 1 ally per turn, basically. And that's the way to kind of bring it down to earth a little bit. Pretty cool champion, pretty cool, interesting dynamic. I think this one's not as highly desirable, but still, nevertheless, a good nod, especially if you're progressing in Faction Wars and you're trying to develop your team. She'll be a great support for that, right? Yeah, are you guys going to go for these champions? I think that's pretty much the main question I want to ask you guys. Let me know. Let me know. I'm curious to say. Now, with that being said, we're going to talk about the last little bit here, which is going to be the Lordly Summoning Pool. Pretty much, we kind of dipped into like Kaja and Timon, and I'm glad we kind of did that ahead of time, so I don't have to go too much down into rationalizing whether this is going to be a good one or not. I'm actually going to move myself out of the way here for a second here. We're going to hop to the other side. But with this champion pool, why should you go for it? So I'm going to go ahead and look at it from an in-game, late-game perspective. For the first part of this, which is, are you done with your faction wars? Or your faction guardian, excuse me. This is a great place where if you do so happen to get your champions or just like basically duplicates, this could be a great place to empower some champions you may use. Like Staltus is great for PvP. He's also great for Dragon Hard content. Sethalia, although her place isn't as significant, outside of maybe like faction wars and some niche areas, some City and Syndranos, which makes all legendaries valuable. There could be some key places where she could be valuable there. Septimus is a boss hitter with the enemy max HP hit, also ignoring shield and block damage debuffs, or buffs, excuse me. Being able to put it on cooldown whenever he kills like maybe a side ad or something like that could be really good for some boss content. And then, of course, having that faction gated fill up if you have them duped, or empowerment if you have them duped. Not a bad spot to do it. Now, from a mid-game and early-game perspective, any legendary is helpful, right? So, we already talked about how their places are valuable in, and progressing in those areas is great. Same thing is also true across the board when it comes to your epics. So noteworthy ones that I kind of peeped out was Ursula for Bannerlords could help you out tremendously from a revive standpoint. Great utility. She is book heavy, as you can obviously see, but a general well-rounded champion in terms of being supportive. Warcaster, if you are still early game to mid game and you're looking to develop an unkillable team, this guy is actually one of the staples who doesn't work by himself, but when partnered with other champions can do very, very good work in the direction of unkillable teams. Having one of him is never bad. Having two of them is even better. And you can even, you know, maybe get duplicates out that way. Now, outside of that, we also have some Ilfric, who I think is a great utility support booster champion. So for go first type team strategies, if you didn't get like a Deacon or High Katoon yet, that could be a great early game grab. Who does like a little bit of all that. Stag, great decreased defense champion with a little bit of a decreased speed with the increased accuracy on himself. A lot of great utility champions for the most part here. Now, I have skipped one legendary, and we're going to talk about him real quickly. Acelin, the stalwart, however you want to pronounce his name. I'm not sure if I think it's Acelin the way they pronounced it in the video. It's a little disheartening, and I'm just going to say that now and ahead of time, that they do have an event, I believe, planned for him to be in a 10x progressive or some kind of event where shard post could be a thing. And they did note in the what's next video that he was not going to be available from a shard event. So there's some miscommunication that is occurring, and I feel like that is important from a company. I want to urge players to reconsider how they handle disseminating their information yet again, and make sure that there's no discrepancies when it comes to their initial statements to release. We want to make sure we're hearing the same information, because this could have affected a lot of players in terms of how they use their shards. A lot of people are pulling because they're like, you know what, we ain't got to worry about Acelin down the road. If we wanted him, we can get him through whatever that new event or whatever external event that is not shard related will be available. Well, lo and behold, we're in the middle of a Prism event, and then down the road, I believe they announced it actually in the game itself that the summoning party for him, which means that he's going to be able to get him from a 10x from Ancients on February 16th. And then, of course, the chances of summoning epic are going to be the same as usual. So this is all information that's important to kind of give you a little bit of a notion. But, you know, people probably would have been a lot more strategic with their Ancients if they were on top of disseminating this information out a little bit more, especially for the people who want him. Now, should you want him? I think, honestly, just from a Unity standpoint, these champions, when paired with some very, very overpowered, I think we can all justify saying that, overpowered champions, I think that they kind of fall into being very, very strong with him on the team. And I think that's kind of where we start. And I'm talking about the duo, Mariska Terras. This guy only makes them even harder to deal with. So it's like, how do we deal with Mariska Terras? Let's give him something even more to benefit from. Now, are you going to want to put him in a team that's locked down to 4? maybe 5 or 6, depending on what area of content you're doing. 6 and 5, probably, because you're either looking at dungeon content or Hydra, for example. 4, where you start looking at arena, maybe not so much, so maybe that's not as much of an issue. But taking it, for example, like we do with those champions in live arena, where one person gets Terrace, the other one tries to take Mariska if they have them, so that they don't get the duo, and then the next person could pick Acelin, or the one that got Terrace could get Acelin, so that could be a secondary alternative, a great grab, which still complements the duo when they're isolated by themselves. It's still a great contributing factor towards it, which makes it even more contended as an option. So I definitely think that's a problem. And then, of course, he has great utility. He heals all allies by the total of all value of all shields. Having a chance to stun will ignore 25% of the resistance. It's a great champion. The Unity bonus is probably the big seller. Allies under shield buffs are immune to CC, basically, in summary words. That's nasty. Ally protection buffs have a 20 chance. Ally protected champions are now able to counterattack whenever there's 2 factions on the same team. And then, of course, the value of all ally shields, like Mariska's, for example, is increased by 100%. Except for those that are granted by like artifact sets like Bolster and Shield. Or the exponential ones that you get from like Arena, I believe. I think they're called the Divine sets. So Divine Offense, Divine Critical, and Divine Life. Those are also technically shield sets for the individual champion that has that set bonus. It's not really worth going for outside of the stats and stuff, but the set bonus is kind of lackluster, right? With that being said, should you go for it? Are you filling up your faction guardians? If so, yes. If you are looking for a particular champion, you're trying to make pressure in Dragon hard, sure. And then, of course, if you are early game, I would say early game to mid game players, if you're on a free-to-play path or a low spender path, this may have low value for you initially, and you'd be projected towards like a future one. You'd probably actually, funny enough, be looking for epics like the Warcaster, more importantly than the legendaries themselves, which is saying something in terms of this champion pool. So I think this one's kind of a, I don't want to say mediocre, but kind of a medium tier to low tier valued Prism event, because of Acelin and those type of champions, depending on where you're at in the game. But I think that this isn't something that you would overly go out of the way for. I think spenders that are looking to fill up their faction guardians and their empowerment routes are probably not looking to empower these particular type of champions, which is why I would say it's still on the lower end of desirable or medium side, depending on it depends on how high you place the value of any individual champion that's in this summoning pool. So I think that with free events that come out, like for example, they have released a Sand Devil Time Attack tournament that I'm doing on my main account. It's not realistic on the free-to-play because I have limited resources, but 2,600 points can get you 40, which is one guaranteed pool. I believe they also had one in an event, which was the new Dungeon Divers. Correct. They had another 20 there. You slap those together, you'll have enough for another pool or two. You could work towards that if you're working towards a fusion at the same time. By all means, get your attempts in, but I don't think going out of your way to spin for the prisms is really worth it. So just take that in mind when you're going for whether or not you're deciding on whether or not you want to go for these events or pools. Is really contentious. I think honestly the progressive events are a lot more interesting than the Prism event outside of Acelin for myself. I personally do want to get some key champions like Cupidus. I wouldn't mind getting another Yumiko. I wouldn't mind getting Siphi and Rhodos, who I still don't have on my main account. Those are all great champions that I would say that I don't have one version of as it is. So one of those would be a great growth opportunity for me to have. With that being said, make the best decision based off of what your account needs are and what your desires are. You know, if you have the means to be able to buy it and you want to, by all means, don't listen to me as the end all be all. Make the decision for yourself because you want to enjoy this game at the end of the day, and that's what's most important. However, that is my consensus of an overall analysis about this particular set of champions. There's some cool, interesting ones in there. I don't think any are super substantial to a point where you have to get them. Maybe outside of Acelin, which I think we should see some playtesting around before we make that conscious decision. Or with the acquisition of the champion, we can playtest it ourselves. So I think we'll have to see how the bread is spread with butter. You know what I'm saying? We'll see how it goes. But with that being said, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you guys think. Are you going to go for this event? Or these events that are coming up? Are you going to go for the Summoning Pool Prism event? Let me know. I'm curious. And with that being said, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. And always, always remember, stay ascended.
the G.